more than 44% of board directors reported that they hadn't had any training for the last 10 years. 10 years. 10 years, you're the same.
Do you wonder how trailblazing leaders sense at scale, evolve to innovate, and align the actions in this increasingly digital world? Welcome to the Exploring Leaders podcast. The experienced team at Digoshen interviews leaders from around the world for insights and inspiration on how to lead in the digital age. In this episode, Digoshen founder Liselette Engstam, who is also an independent board chair and director, researcher, author, and advisor, asks the questions.
So warm welcome to the podcast series about when the old playbook doesn't work again. So Beyond the Old Playbook. And it's an entire little series about this, and we're interviewing leaders and board members on their perspectives on when things have changed so much that what they already knew needs to be revisited. In this topic, in this episode, we're going to talk about, can European boards help Europe compete again? It's a grand topic. So I'm so delighted to have two really experienced board leaders to discuss this topic. So it's Fernanda Torre, who is the Board Impacts Forum leader, the Nordic chapter of the Chapter Zero Alliance. And I have Sylvia Robben, who is the leader for Chapter Zero in the Netherlands. And you, both of you, are actually co-leading a really interesting research project right now, which is looking to develop a European boards growth and resilience roadmap. And I think it's going to be released in Davos in 2027. And before that, you're also inviting experienced board members to a forum in Amsterdam in October. So Fernanda and Sylvia, warm welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thank you.
So I wanted to start in a similar way that we've started with this series, and that is to show you a painting. And this painting is done by Umberto Boccioni, and it was done already in 1910. It's called The City Arises. So I thought I'd ask you, what is your impression of this painting? What strikes you most? And then if it were to reflect Europe right now, what do you see in that? Do you want to start, Sylvia?
I'm not sure. Yeah, well, that's I think two big questions, each on their own. I think I've never seen this one, so that's already exciting. A lot of stuff in motion, I guess. I mean, when I started to enjoy art, thanks to my husband, I felt the pressure of needing to have an opinion about it. And his question was like, do you like it or not? So if I go with that, I like it very much. I think the second question around Europe, tricky. You could be alluding to the fact that a lot of things are in motion in Europe, given the geopolitical changes and the new world order. So with that in mind, I think this could reflect a bit of the out of depth feeling people can feel at the moment.
Thank you so much for sharing that. What strikes you most, Fernanda?
Well, I absolutely love the futurist movement. I think it's really beautiful how you can convey this kind of movement and progress. It's beautiful, but it also has a very clear dark side. at the time, the futurist movement was very connected with the extreme nationalism, Mussolini in Italy. So it also has this dark side. And kind of looking into what's happening in Europe at the moment, I think that it actually fits quite well. There's so much happening, and the futurists had this very kind of glorification of the movement. And, I am researching on AI. I work with innovation management. I do personally glorify movement and moving forward. And but then there's also this very clear consequences on the planet, on the biosphere, on society, that we need to be aware of. So a lot of this kind of violence of the movement and of the progress, it really has a very dark side also that I think we should really be aware of in a global context, but very specifically in an European context also.
Right. Thank you so much for sharing that. If I'd add, I also see these things that somebody's trying to move forward, a little person down in the middle left, and then he's trying to get others to follow, which I think is an interesting thing. I don't usually put my own reflection in there, but I think this one you could really look at for so long, and you can see so many different things in it. And the interesting thing is, I think many times we see things out of the perspective and context where we are. So I want
Could it be a board director then? Could it be a board director trying to kind of pull in others?
It could definitely be a board director. And you obviously, it could be you actually trying to get board directors to see new things. So there's a lot of opportunities that we can see in this. So I wanted to start a bit more with around the area, what is holding our companies back? And I wanted to start with, what do you believe is the biggest obstacle for European competitiveness today? And that is possible to actually challenge from boards. Do you want to start, Fernanda?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it's very well documented what are the diseases, if we can say, that Europe is suffering at the moment. There's the Draghi report. There's a lot of really good documentation when it comes to the fragmentation of the market, for example, etc. But if I would put into the perspective of boards, I think it's very important that board directors understand that they are not bystanders. It's not about just seeing what's happening in the world and trying to manage it somehow. I think that there's and one of the things that we are really actively trying to do with our project, the roadmap project, just the name roadmap, right? It's about action. It's about, do things, taking responsibility. I think that there's really something about boards having a bit more of a risk appetite and strategic ambition. So not just feeling constrained by regulation, not just being constrained by their own conservative perspective to how the market should develop, but, can we inspire board directors to take bold attitudes and above all encourage management to be bold also? It implies that they have to be literate. It implies that they have to command subject. There's a lot of implications and when we go into the details. But I think if I would have to say one, it's really about this leading with this strategic ambition, I would say.
Very interesting. As we know, as working on a board, it's really easy to just be caught into like a yearly process of things and trying to add value only in these moments. So I think it's a very good reflection that we all need to think more clearly about what are we trying to help this company become? Did you have any comments on this first question, Sylvia, that you wanted to compliment with?
Yeah, I think the points that Fernanda made, it really resonates with me, and building on that, I think then the question always becomes around, but how do you do that? And I think that is also something, being a bit cheesy here, referencing the programs from Boards Impact Forum and Chapter Zero Netherlands. That's exactly what we do. We don't just observe and comment, but we try to really work with non-executives into how do you actually go about it? What are the use cases? Where do we see already progress? I think from reading all these views in the world about what companies, what is holding companies back, over the past years, if you look at the discussions that we've had under the Chatham House rule, a lot of that is about waiting for local governments because of their pause. And in the Netherlands, we've had a really long period where the government tried to establish for 2 times in a row. What does that imply for a company? And then is it then the natural reaction to pause, focus on the short term? If you look at the role of the non-executives, zooming out, looking at the long term, I think that's where it becomes interesting around pushing for the action that Fernanda is making, which is super difficult and layered in how to get that done. And making it practical, I think, is helpful in the companies where it is happening, where they fail, maybe because they were first movers, but first movers can also be actually taking the benefits ahead of the rest of the crew. I think the biggest obstacles can sit with the boardroom dynamics even. So aside from what we're trying to discuss here, it's really about how does the board composition look like? And the last one, then I'll pause because I'm bringing in quite a few things here, is also around how do we structure remuneration? So if we want certain action to be seen, the bold movements, how does that tie in with the structures that have been the status quo for the past decennia? So what does it mean to be bold? It also means that we may need to let go of the traditional cadences that we work within. I don't know if I'm going too much off topic, Lisa.
No, not at all. It's perfect. And exactly leads very nicely into the next question, which is around, are we in European companies and boards more constrained about the external factors as the regulation that you mentioned, or the market fragmentation, or are we actually constrained by our own internal barriers and our own ambition? What do you think?
Do you want to jump in, Sylvia, or shall I?
Oh, it's just a pleasure. The way Lisa Lot sets this up. So a really basic one that sticks with me, and that is also making me very enthusiastic about what we try to achieve with our mission to activate and equip board directors. When we look at how we feel about whatever business topic, then what you see is that people feel they're not necessarily empowered. And that is not much different for a board director, and is very lonely at the top. So we feel that we may be alone in the way we think, about zooming out and long-term value creation. 25% is needed of groups to actually move forward. And if you start to make that practical, it's not impossible at all. And feeling empowered, I think, is something very internal in one's mind. And if we look at the board director in their private lives, as a leader and as a non-exec, there is that activation within oneself that is really something that needs to happen. That is the constraint that I see. I think that most people are ambitious, either intrinsically or instrumental.
Yeah.
For a different podcast, whether it matters that it's intrinsically or not. But that's, I think, what really helps to just realize the power that one has.
Right. Right. Fernanda.
If you allow me to pick up on exactly that point, Sylvia, I think that there's a big part of that empowerment that also has to deal with knowledge, with capabilities, with just, for me to feel comfortable with a subject, I do have to be exposed to it and be able to command that subject, right? So just very recently, I was looking into the the board survey. I think it was from Intersearch, and these were global data, but it was something like more than 44% of board directors reported that they hadn't had any training for the last 10 years. 10 years. 10 years, you're the same. There's no magic, right? I think that there is really something about being able to work with the board directors, going to the point that you were saying, Sylvia, about the kind of work that we're trying to do, about really making them feel empowered. And I think that there's also an element which has to do with the complexity. When we are talking about board training, when we're trying to empower board directors, we are talking about subjects that are complex and quite often intertwine with different thematic areas. So when we are talking about competitiveness and resilience in Europe, we, for the sake of our project and how we have been thinking about it, we are talking at least 3 different transitions that we need to do in Europe. It's the sustainability, the green transition, we're talking about AI, we're talking about digital, and we're talking about defense and sovereignty for Europe. So if we are also first, if we don't empower board directors with training, with information, access to data, etc., and above all, if we don't see these questions as being intertwined, then it's very difficult to support boards in thinking differently, I think, and that's the kind of things that we're trying to do.
Yeah, and if I may just add to that as well, I think there's that that element about how you actually how you can realize as a board that the constraint may be self-inflicted and that is meant as a positive comment actually. But I think the tendency that's been observed is that because of the long list of geopolitical changes and the rapid pace, it means that the short term has overtaken the long term. So even, and we also need to probably mention briefly when we speak freely about the 1-tier, 2-tier boards both. So it's works slightly different from one to another, but the main points are still valid around then more processes are being rolled out to mitigate, but that is not actually leading to different results. And I think one of the papers that was sent recently by the chair of Chapter Zero France about board overload really resonated about the constraints and that board overload and the questions that we need to ask ourselves are really helpful in determining, like, do we need more people in the board? Do we need to spend more time than part-time on one board position? So it's like going into like what are actually the rules within that we operate again, and then that complexity, Fernanda, that you are referencing. It's not a crisis, right? This is the new. This is just how it is, and you might as well want to be that first mover. And I also will recommend a paper on that from Erasmus, from Dirk Schoenmaker, on how it can look like to be a first mover, but also about how daunting that can be given the early investments that are required. There's something about the interconnectedness between all the big themes, and bringing that down to a way of working that is way more future-proof, and that is
Right.
up.
Right. And as I've been also working a lot on listed boards and private boards and private equity boards and startups, you very easily can compare where the focus becomes. And one of the things, and I think personally, one of the traps that a lot of listed companies have done is, if we're talking about the overload, most listed companies pour that overload into the audit and risk committees. So actually, if you look at the audit and risk committees now, they have all of the financials, all of the linkage to business, all of the risk, all of the cyber, all of the sustainability. I mean, so I think that the boards are definitely overloaded, but I also think very much that we need to think a bit differently on actually getting help, looking through issues, and bringing that back up again. So I think it's an absolute part of what we need to consider, and it's still very much in our hands. So going into governing risk versus opportunity, and I don't need to ask you, I think we all know that we were coming very much from governing risk. But if I'll turn it around and say, governing opportunity hasn't been very much an established practice in that sense, and it's poured into strategy. But what ways have you seen that boards can actually more creatively look at opportunity across time horizons, across the way that they are guiding the management? Do you want to start, Fernanda?
Yeah. Well, this is, of course, a very dear area to me, really coming from the innovation management world. And I usually say that how we do innovation, how we govern innovation, we're giving innovation a bad name. Let me try to unpack that. Because we have not really, I don't think we have been doing it in a serious way. There's many reasons why I haven't been doing it in a serious way. I think that's clearly a lack of understanding by boards around how to even govern opportunities or innovation, lack of processes, culture, etc. But independently of the reasons, or how we got here, why we are here, nevertheless, we need to very quickly understand that when we talk about all the transitions that we're facing, if we only see these transitions from the risk perspective, then we are mostly seeing them as a cost. And we will not change, we will not be able to have a resilient, sustainable, digital leading, sovereign Europe if there's no business case for it, if we don't
Right.
see if we don't see the upsides of it, right? It's a bit I'm a bit oversimplifying, but I think that there's a very critical need for boards to take a step back and understand the importance of governing innovation and governing opportunity. Sylvia was already talking about how boards, and also you, Liselot, are really overwhelmed by the amount of work that
Yeah.
they have at the moment. So definitely the board agenda is is an obstacle, because when you have so much on your mind, it's very hard to take the space to wait a second, let's actually see the positive side of this.
Yeah.
So there's an element that we absolutely need to address. We really need to prioritize and make space for it. There's that element. There is the element, as I was talking before, about understanding how to govern these issues together. What are the opportunities across green, digital, defense, sovereignty? Because if we are able to integrate those three in the business, then we're really guaranteed to be a resilient business. So we cannot see them separately. And I think that there's really an element, and we were already talking about it, about the incentivization. And Sylvia was talking about the incentivization, was talking about the alignment with management, KPIs, what needs to be done. And I think that if the board is not on top of the opportunities of the value creation, of the innovation, it seems just natural that the KPIs and the incentivization are going to fall behind, right? We kind of govern what we understand. So there needs to be a very clear transactional element to this also, so that we are able to get alignment in the organization, I think.
Very, very good and insightful. Sylvia, do you want to comment?
Yeah, definitely. I think really strong, your last sentence almost on, we govern what we understand. And I think that is, in this era, we need to govern even when we don't, or we don't fully understand. You mentioned it just before, Lieselot, on the risk and audit committees. So if we then wonder why we govern risk quite traditionally, the answer is in the question almost. Definitely shift in mindset is needed. But I think maybe more of a personal opinion about that is on that opportunity side, it's seeing how it's done. It's seeing where people failed, our companies. It's seeing what was the role of the non-executive, the supervisory board, in the strategy of the company. What action, what questions have they asked to help? And there's not a shortage of examples in the Netherlands on the companies that have been really innovative. Of course, ASML is used, and Peter Wenning is definitely, he was the CEO there for a very long time, really thinking about that bit on that research and development side, seizing the opportunities. And you can argue that for a technology company, that makes a lot of sense. It's much harder to do that in different industries. One of the packaging companies has done a similar thing where they really invest early. But then you get that tension between the financials and is that actually going to materialize? So when the opportunity that we looking to seize, that we can't evidence it as such, I think that is naturally when we go back that we govern what we understand.
Yeah.
So I'm definitely seeing a traditional approach. I think we see together as well that there are a lot of companies that step up by changing entities within their business models, reinvent themselves completely. Auping is a Dutch company that is now completely circular, producing mattresses. You got Fairphone, a Dutch company that produces Fairphones, admittedly. Without going into much detail, Shell sold their sustainability bit, and then a competitor just bought it. So what does it mean to seize the opportunities? I think is also very important. Like, it's never just about the risk or the opportunity. It's about the whole complexity around it that makes one to look at the opportunity and saying, actually, we're too early. And the other things, we're going to be that first mover. But you need to have that flexible mindset and doing the bold move to say, we can't have all the information ready now, and yet we're going to be resilient and just move with it. Very daunting and very easy to say from the sideline what we expect from our non-execs and supervisory boards.
I think there's also something around actually getting shared frameworks, for instance, things you can use to think around. And one of the things that we've been doing is around, and I'm doing on several of my boards, is around, if you sit on boards, you're almost always used to seeing a risk map, right? The risk map and everything's plotted in. And we always challenge people to say, so where's the opportunity map? What does it look like? And for most people, it's very, very foggy. they really have to think a lot about it. And I think that also says a lot. So it doesn't mean that you are able to create it, but at least trying to create it is really important. So I think that's one thing. I think the other thing, I was reading a very recent research report from OpenAI, where they had looked at how does successful companies actually implement AI. And one of the findings was that, which goes against all of these discussions around experiments, and that was that they found that when companies have done experiments, the people who were involved in those experiments continued to innovate. And that's actually where they got a lot of the new innovation from, which I think is really interesting. So some of the innovation from board level isn't just what is the innovation is, are we ensuring that there's financial gains going to a group that we know might actually sit more with the answers. So it's also about capital allocation.
Exactly.
More than just knowing all of where the invention is going to come from. So let's go over to what it means to govern for renewal. And in your mind, what role should boards play, if any, to actually accelerate innovation and technology in a sustainable way? What roles do you think boards should play? Do you want to start, Fernanda?
Yeah, sure. I can jump in here. So I think that there's that I think we should acknowledge that the board of the future is going to look different from the board of today. I'm just not talking about the board directors as individuals, but the processes, the way how things are organized. I think that we need to accept that things are moving and evolving, and take the opportunity that there's this transition to really embrace it somehow. Was it Winston Churchill that said, "Never let a good crisis go to waste"? So it feels like there's so much transition at the moment, transformation. Europe really needs to do this, but then, okay, let's take it as an opportunity to make the best out of it. Okay, let's change in a good way. So I think that this governing of renewal, there's many different points, and most of them we have already talked about. It's really about the focus of the board, is where they spend time on. There's no magic. We need to work with the board agenda. We have been talking a little bit about the risk appetite, and I think that just as risk has the twin in opportunity, risk appetite has the risk has the twin in the risk of not doing anything, the risk of not moving, that I think we should be much better at assessing. Otherwise, innovation and corporate renewal is only risk, is only uncertainty. We should talk about, okay, but what's the risk of doing nothing about it?
Yeah.
I think that when we're talking about this uncertainty and mapping different possibilities, and even what will happen if we don't do anything, scenario thinking is a very powerful tool. We are also working a lot with scenarios. We're even creating a training on scenarios for the Chapter Zero Alliance, we at Boards Impact Forum. So there's something, there are the tools, but there's something about understanding what happens if we don't move. And there's a very, very concrete, very challenging moment that it's the AI transition, and the AI transition together with the sustainability transition. I think that we really need to be better at training board directors, at giving them information, and also together with the management team, how they can collaborate together in driving this transition. And again, having sustainability, climate, and the social aspects of that in a very, very closely aligned, because these are fundamentally strategic decisions. This impacts strategy.
Yeah.
It's not possible for a business to say, oh, we have this big strategy, and then part of this strategy, there's an element that is AI. No, the decisions that we make today about our AI full stack, for example, has very direct consequences in our carbon footprint. It has very direct consequences in our future, what we can do in the future or not. And we really need to understand that. A big part of this understanding, I think it also has to do, we haven't been talking so much about stakeholders today, but there's a big element of the board having this very clear alignment with stakeholders, with the owners, with the clients, understanding the value chain, understanding the regulation, having this bigger picture. Again, it's in a way also connected. If you have good stakeholder understanding, you are also going to be much better at working with the different scenarios. You understand better what are the different consequences of the different options. But I think that there's really, in a way, an uncomfortable conclusion, which is corporate renewal needs to be addressed at the board level, and we're not doing great.
Yet.
Yes.
Sylvia.
Well, I definitely echoed a bit on the stakeholder dialogue. That's definitely something that's there's a lot of buzz around that for logical reasons. And the second point I take away really on that fragmentation that we tend to see sometimes, and picking that all up together, that is, we can call it strategy, corporate renewal, but how you do that, how do you ask the right questions? It also requires that understanding and keeping up to date with the rapid pace in which all these emerging topics come into the boardroom. So I think a big challenge, actually, if you don't mind me going just tiny bit into that, we govern what we understand, that point that Fernanda makes. It also implies that innovation, that corporate renewal, how do you make that happen without without doing that with, how do you say that, within a parameter? So I think of the, how do you say that in English? I think the limitation sometimes felt is that the financial growth cannot be touched. It's a very unpopular thing to say. But so everybody is like, yeah, we need to have corporate renewal, but when it hits the bottom end, then I think that's where it becomes really tricky. So as a organization, you need to improve yourself and innovate. And we know that, I think, because of the rapidly changing circumstances, because to stay relevant and to have that, to be able to be competitive, that is much needed. But to govern for that renewal, I think the honest questions need to be asked about how willing are we in a board to actually sacrifice. And that sacrificing, that sits also within the financial gains. And I know that's a very tricky one, because we also need to make sure that we're stable. But being stable today and not doing that corporate renewal early enough means that the cost is going to be so much higher in the future. So that is where I think the bold movement is the only thing that a non-exec intrinsically or instrumentally has to do. Yeah. Does that make sense, Liselotte, or am I confused?
It definitely makes sense. And I think that, one of the things I do with my own boards, once a year, actually now twice a year, I sit down and I evaluate my own little companies, and I look for information, and I do some analysis, and then I look to what do we really need to take us somewhere. And I do this individually because I feel that it's important for me to have an opinion about where to take a company. And it's very hard if all of that is just collective, because then I don't know if I would have thought something differently. And I think that is a really good, stable insight that I'm absolutely willing to change it when I get into the strategy debates and all of that. But I think it's important that I continue to have an opinion about how to help a company move forward, basically.
Yeah.
And I do think that it helps my companies as well. I think the other thing is that it really helps to also have several companies to do it, because then I always have this thing about, oh, we're doing this like this here and like that there. I think the other thing around stakeholders, I think that most companies, when all of the challenges happened during COVID and you had some physical value chain, I think everybody realized that the boards hadn't put enough focus on that value chain. I think now the challenge is that all companies need to think about their value chains, not just in the physical matter, but all in the digital matter, or in actually even in the customer matter. What is it that we really, can we afford to serve some customers? Is that longer in our merit? So I think there's a lot of things we can think
And I
about.
think also, Lieselot, if I can add to that, I think you are a multi non-exec, if that resonates, which means that indeed you can, because of being in companies in different industries, it really makes you a better non-exec.
Yeah.
That exposure, I think, also to conclude on how can non-execs govern for renewal, we are, of course, talking about the program that we're offering in this podcast as well, not even just to promote it, but it just ties into what you get between the companies, helps you to become a better non-exec. But the peer-to-peer exchange, that is where a lot of value comes from. If you are in a trusted environment with your peers and you are under the Chatham House rule, where, as we know, fine to reference the comment may, but it can't relate back to the person or company it's about. That is really powerful, that peer-to-peer exchange. Hence, we're coming together end of the year with a group of non-execs cross-border, because European boards are up against something that is much bigger than their local company.
And I think that's a fantastic way to conclude with the last question, and that is around what are you hoping for the board forum, European Boards and Resilience Forum in October?
Yeah,
What are
so
you
I'll
hoping for,
be short
Fernanda?
and sweet. Oh, sorry.
Yeah. No, go ahead, Sylvia.
I can be short and sweet. We have seen the power in bringing together peers. Non-execs are often invited by Big Four, by lawyer companies, and they do a really excellent job in bringing in the right topics and experts and having exchange. This is done all by non-execs themselves. It is not commercial. It is really about, this is what keeps me up at night. It is lonely at the top. You can't raise your hand, but you have so many questions. By bringing in this format into the boardroom, it's really powerful. So you get it on a personal level, you become a better non-exec. You have a network you can tap into locally and across border. So that is what I'm hoping for that. But it's just the power of the format and the setup, bringing in and not let everybody in. We need to really make sure that the non-execs are set together, face challenges of the same scale. And that is the feedback that we get continuously, which is really good, of course.
Yes, thank you.
If
Fernanda,
I may
what do you
jump
hope
in, I think that one aspect that we haven't addressed yet has to do with the owners and the owner's voice and the responsibility of the owners. Is it family office, different kind of investors, etc. Going back to the example that Sylvia was giving previously, under just a quick reflection, an example from the Nordics is Saab, for example. because it had such a big, the Valamberi family had such a big stake, there were a lot of strategic decisions that were made that sacrificed the financial aspects in terms of scraping some of their capabilities. They decided, no, we want to keep them. And now that we are in the position that we're in, it means that Saab is very well positioned internationally vis-a-vis with other European providers of defense solutions. So I think that the voice of the owners and what the owners want from board directors is very important. And this is also one of the elements that we are going to address in the European Forum. So it's very much around how board directors have the peer-to-peer exchange that Sylvia was addressing. That is extremely powerful, being all in the same boat, all facing the same challenges, understanding what are the constraints, not just internationally, but also the constraints in terms of what do the owners, what are our directives, and putting all this together, again, very critical topics. What is this in terms of defense, in terms of sovereignty? How can Europe stand alone if needed? Doesn't mean that we want to, but if it's needed. How can Europe be sustainable? How can we guarantee a good life quality for our citizens? How can we avoid what we have been seeing in terms of the increased amount of deaths that we saw this year in France and in Spain due to the heat waves? And how can we be able to take advantage in a competitive way of AI in a way that is sustainable, respecting the biosphere, and with responsibility towards the social implications of AI. So when we bring all these topics together and we don't see them separate, but we start connecting the dots, I think that there's something really, really powerful in that.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for sharing your perspectives. And we're also going to share a blog post on top of this. And there's been a mention of a number of papers, and we're going to make sure that that's included so people can find that. Thank you so much for sharing this. Sylvia, Fernanda, fantastic insights. And we look forward to the October event and, of course, to the report in Jan. So in every podcast episode, we like to leave the listeners with something to think about until we meet next. And in this case, it is, if you look back to your last leadership or board agendas, how much attention were you devoting to protecting today's business versus thinking about creating tomorrow? Thank you so much, ladies.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Stop.
Thanks for listening to Exploring Leaders, a podcast produced by Digoshen with the ambition to inspire insightful leadership in the digital age. If you found this episode interesting, join the momentum to amplify the voices of trailblazing leaders by sharing it with others for inspiration. For any questions or recommendations on other inspiring leaders you like to listen to, contact us via our website, digoshen.com, or via social media as LinkedIn or Twitter.